Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Say Yes to Life, where we learn to embrace our Catholic faith in the secular world. I'm your host, Peter Range, Senior Fellow for the Center for Christian Virtue, and welcome to show number 447 as we continue the fight for every single human life, born, preborn, and yours in our world today. On today's show, we're excited to welcome Greg Scott, Executive Vice President at the 1792 Exchange and President of Messaging Well. Greg has been a national leader in legal and policy advocacy for 25 years. He began his career in communications and public relations in the U.S. Marine Corps as a public affairs officer. He spent 15 years at Alliance Defending Freedom, ultimately as Senior Vice President of Communications. He also served as Director of Media and Public Relations for the Heritage Foundation and as a Public Affairs Chief for the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Greg has been published in Variety, the Arizona Republic, Washington Times, the Daily Signal, among other publications. He's also been quoted by many outlets, including the Associated Press, the AP, the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Washington Post, Fox News, Politico. All of this to say he's much more important than I am, folks. But he's born in Southern California, raised on Long Island. Greg and his family now reside in Northern Virginia. Greg and I are going to be talking about his life, his work, maybe a little bit about the pro-life movement in just a minute. But first, let's go ahead and take 180 seconds around Ohio and the nation and talk about what's happening in the pro-life movement and the news. First, from Fox News. Hamas has agreed to a peace deal pushed by President Donald Trump to end the war in Gaza and return the hostages 2 years after the terrorist attack the terrorists attacked Israel on October 7th, 2023, sparking not only the bloodiest days for Jews since the Holocaust, but a deadly war and a humanitarian crisis across the Gaza Strip. So President Trump went to Truth Social to announce the agreement, and it looks like he told Sean Hannity, looks like Monday or Tuesday, hostages could be released. So continue to pray for peace in the Middle East. Second, from Susan B. Anthony, Pro-Life America. Following the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA's approving a new generic abortion drug last week. Yes, you heard that correctly. They approved a new generic abortion drug last week. 51 senators, led by Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, sent a letter to the FDA and the Department of Health and Human Services calling for immediate action. Look, we just need to reinstate what Biden underdone, and that was concerning any kind of regulatory standards around the abortion pill. And this is really, really important. During COVID-19, President Biden's FDA kind of exploited that emergency to remove the in-person dispensing requirements of mifepristone. Taking the doctor out of the picture and allowing mail-order abortion drugs without any medical oversight, safeguards, or even confirmation that it's the woman ordering the drugs. So we're just looking for some common sense things being put back in place. I mean, ultimately, I want the darn thing banned. But with that being said, third and finally, the 2024 Ohio-induced abortion report was released last week, and it found that there was 21,829 reported abortions in Ohio in 2024. But because of the abortion pill, its availability through the mail, that number is, it could be 10,000 more here in our state. Sadly, the report, though, found that 41% of abortions occurred after the baby's heartbeat was detected. It's sad at any point of the pregnancy, but 41% after abortions happened after the baby's heartbeat was detected. 97 abortions, just 0.4% of abortions performed in Ohio, were quote-unquote performed to save the life of the mother. And in fact, more than 186 abortions resulted in complications for the mother. So interesting, we always hear abortions, pregnancy is worse for the mom than abortion is. Well, not according to the actual reports that come out. That's why it's important to be engaged at the local level. 40 Days for Life. Go out and pray. It's so incredibly important to pray for the end to abortion. Every single human life is made in God's image and likeness and is deserving of the first fundamental right, the right to life. You have no other right unless you have the right to live. All right, now it's time for the main show as I welcome Greg Scott. Greg Scott is the Executive Vice President at the 1792 Exchange and President of Messaging Well. Greg, welcome to Say Yes to Life.
Peter, thanks for having me, brother. And I got to say, it was great to see you last week at the Essential Summit. God is really blessing your work at CCV, brother. And it's really an honor to partner with you at CCV. And I'm really excited for our new friendship. I'm praying it grows. Finally, I knew this had already happened when I saw you. I neglected to congratulate you on your new baby. May the Lord richly bless your entire family with the new little one on the scene. A friend of mine says that, the left is trying to change the culture in its way, we're trying to change the culture in another way by having babies. So congratulations. Let's change the culture, brother.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah, number 5 has come, a little Anthony, and such a
Praise
tremendous little blessing. And people forget that, an abortion happens. It's not only affecting the child in the womb who's killed, but it's affecting the mother as well. And this is not a pro-woman thing to take place. And so, yeah, we're going to have as many babies in the Range household as we can. I hope my wife is listening. No, I'm just kidding. Well, Greg, speaking of life, though, let's just start with your story. You have an incredibly impressive background. I'd love to hear your side of things, including, if you feel comfortable with it, just a little bit of your faith and family journey for our listeners.
Yeah, of course. My life is quite literally intertwined with the pro-life movement. I was in, and this is good, this is going to age me here. I was literally in utero when Roe v. Wade was decided in January of 1973. My mother was unmarried, teenager, poor home. I was the perfect candidate for abortion. But my mother chose life. My grandfather, who lived and died a non-believer, told her when she was terrified to tell him that she was pregnant, the words he said were, "There will be no abortion." And that's actually what I pray for our country and our world. There will be no abortion. So the life issue has been a life issue for me. For that reason and many more. Yeah. So that's really where that is my literal origin story.
That's incredibly powerful to think about the fact that you could not be here. We could not be having this conversation if you had been aborted. And when we abort a child, we impact not just one person, but generations ultimately. So how did you get into kind of communications business work, and how did you ultimately end up at the 1792 Exchange?
Yeah, that's a interesting story to me. I hope it's interesting to others as well. I got into communications in the U.S. Marine Corps. I grew up on Long Island in a non-Christian home, was abandoned by my father as a young child, and really lived a destructive life in every way you can imagine. But when I was 21, I was going to college, wasting a lot of my own time and a lot of my mom's money. I knew I needed to make a change, or I was definitely headed for jail or worse. So I self-administered the biggest possible boot to my posterior and decided to enlist in the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps has got a lot of great programs for advancement. So I was a mechanic at the time. Nobody can believe that because I don't even change my own oil anymore. But I was accepted into a program during that time that allowed me to get my degree while I was on active duty. And when I completed that, I was commissioned as an officer, and I became a public affairs officer. So if J.D. Vance wasn't such a youngster, I probably would have been his boss at one time or another in the Marine Corps because he was a combat correspondent. So in those 25 years, as you mentioned, I served at Alliance Defending Freedom, had a lot of, learned a lot there, went through a lot of battles there. Heritage Foundation, same thing, led the media and public relations team. I actually did spend a legislative cycle at CCP's Arizona counterpart, Center for Arizona Policy, which is a great learning experience. I didn't know how the legislative sausage was made at the state level, but at least I got some taste of it, and it was a great experience. And as you also mentioned, I served as a public affairs chief for Customs and Border Protection during the first Trump administration. As far as when I came to faith, I told you I grew up in a non-believing household. The story is too long for this show, but I did come to faith later in life at 28 while in the Marine Corps and as a Raiders fan. One of my pastors told me that's impossible, but God works miracles, does he not? And shortly after I came to faith, God brought me a wonderful Christian woman, and she is now my wife, and we are going on 23 years of marriage, although I'm the only one that looks older somehow.
Well, as a Raiders fan, then I can certainly connect with you. I'm a Browns fan, and the suffering that we've both experienced over the years. Yes. Hey, it's taught me a lot about suffering, embracing it as a part of the faith. But anyway, hey, with the 1792 Exchange, I'm guessing that a good amount of our listeners actually don't know what the 1792 Exchange is. So can you share its purpose, its mission for our folks?
Yeah, of course. So 1792 Exchange was founded in 2001, and our mission is simply helping businesses get back to business. And we do that by influencing American companies to respect the American principles of free speech, freedom of religion, and free enterprise. Now, our part in doing that, because this is a team effort, it's a coalition effort, and you at CCV, Peter, are very close partners of ours, so you're familiar with our work. But we produce in-depth research, robust data, and trustworthy analysis to assist a whole host of people, including these companies, to help these companies disentangle themselves from ideologically driven practices, some of which I know we're going to get into: DEI, ESG, participation in the Human Rights Campaign, corporate equality index. We don't think businesses should be politically motivated or held hostage to ideological partisans. We want these companies to be able to disentangle themselves and to provide them a framework or a roadmap to neutrality, so they can focus on serving shareholders, customers, and employees with excellence and integrity instead of serving ideological agendas.
Yeah, we witnessed this right here in the state of Ohio. I mean, Nationwide Insurance was one of those organizations that kind of sold themselves as your mom and pop insurance store, and to our farmers across the state. But they were also supporting all this kind of DEI, ESG nonsense. And so maybe let's just begin there. What exactly is ESG, DEI? Again, imagine some of our listeners very pro-life focused, but I think this comes down to being some pro-life issues as well. What is ESG? What is DEI? And how does it affect the average American worker? And then I'd love to get into the 1792 success at getting some of these companies back to a neutral stance. But let's just begin with our definitions: ESG, DEI, and where did it come from?
Yeah, well, these two three-letter concepts are extremely important to pro-life listeners, people who have this as their kind of life's mission and their ministry. Multinational and multi-billion-dollar corporations act like super governments with outsized influence on how we all live our lives. So, in many cases, that which the left cannot achieve politically, legislatively, judicially, or even socially, they'll use the coercive power of oligarchic companies to get what they want anyway. So ESG and DEI are two examples of this. So ESG is a kind of a collection of the left's goals all in one package that forces companies to advance that radical agenda or suffer in the marketplace. The term ESG itself was first used officially in 2004 by the United Nations Global Impact, but the concept's been around since the 70s when it was known as something called socially responsible investing. And this was really a way for Davos types to invest their portfolios to match their ideology. For example, one of the things that they did was they had campaigns to divest in apartheid South Africa. I mean, so some of it was well intended, but like a lot of the nice sounding terms that we hear, what they do is really nefarious. So ESG, breaking it down, the E stands for environmental, and the primary target of this part of ESG is really eliminating fossil fuels, but it can also include things like policies that would reduce meat consumption and really, control how you eat, to reduce emissions, and really, as we've heard, people like Bill Gates and others say that reduce the population. So S stands for social. This is the kind of package of the things that your audience is probably most familiar with. Companies are required to adopt every leftist policy, promote them like racial identity politics, abortion on demand, transgender ideology, etc. And then the G stands for governance. This is where everything is put into practice. So you get your environmental, your social, and then your governance. So this is where the social credit scores of these companies are calculated. Are their minority hiring quotas and promotions adequate? Is executive compensation tied to ESG goals? Do they have that credit score to not essentially be canceled? And the reason why this matters is that for the companies put themselves at risk of being canceled. For example, losing access to financial institutions who will withhold funding for them if ESG credit score falls short. And it's a big deal for larger companies, but it's a bigger deal for smaller companies who already have high barriers to entry into these competitive industries. Imagine being told as a small, say, drilling technology company that you have to cover travel expenses for an employee to get a surgical abortion, or that you have to cover child genital mutilation in your insurance plan. So, and I use the example of a drilling company because automatically, if we're talking about fossil fuels, it makes it a lot less likely that small business owner, that entrepreneur, that inventor that innovator will be able to even enter the market because of the industry that he's trying to get into, the industry he's trying to get into.
So interesting. So who again is kind of behind pushing this? You mentioned kind of multinational corporations who are using their coercive power to kind of push down, whether it's abortion on demand, whether it's this radical view of the environment that, hey, if we just have less people, then we'll all be more happier. Who ultimately is kind of behind? Is it kind of like BlackRock? I mean, who's behind these multinational corporations pushing this?
Yes, well, you name BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, the big three. Any of these really, really solid environmentalist guys who all fly in on their private jets to Davos every year. Just look at that crowd, and that's the people we're talking about.
Gosh, so DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, that's a part of governance, or is it something that's completely separate than ESG?
Yeah, DEI would actually fall under ESG governance, but it's a separate, ugly monster of its own. Again, you've got something that sounds nice: diversity, equity, inclusion, which is what DEI stands for. But what these are the internal policies, the machine makers that call for like hiring and promoting people based on intersectional categories like race, sexual orientation, gender identification, and then disadvantaging employees that are not in those favored categories. So they claim their rights and they claim their roots in the civil rights movement, which of course you're going to do because it's great co-branding. But the real basis is Marxist, plain and simple. It's setting up an oppressed versus oppressor mindset and relying on kind of ethereal revolutionary concepts like structural and systemic racism and queer theory to set their employee policies. And what this really does is it creates a new ruling class within these companies in a hierarchy with, of course, conveniently, the proponents of DEI at the top of that hierarchy. Some animals are more equal than others.
Gosh, I'm just thinking about some companies here in Toledo or around the state of Ohio. You're talking about, whether it's Huntington Bank or Owens Corning and all those different things. I've had individuals, friends, working in a particular company where they've sat down for one of the staff meetings and some of this stuff is kind of awkwardly brought up and they talk about, well, don't misgender your employees. Oh, by the way, we're going to have, abortion on demand. If you want it, we'll pay for that, but we're not going to pay for, maternity or paternity leave, but we'll pay for you to go get an abortion at the end of the day. What can the average person working at one of these companies or just someone who's listening to this and maybe learning about it for the first time, they're like, oh my gosh, this is what I've heard about. How can they fight back against that kind of larger global push towards the ESG, DEI, and ultimately what sounds like kind of an attempt of kind of socialist takeover, if you will, or socialist ideology here in the States?
Yeah, well, I mean, most successful movements do come from the local level. So if you are an average citizen, let's say your listeners are not average; they're all elite. So let's say your elite listeners,
I like that.
Citizen awareness and engagement is really the key. So when companies are behaving badly, if you're outside of a company by doing things like hosting and sponsoring local pride parades during which, as we know, naked people are gyrating in front of children and performing sex acts in public and in broad daylight, the average citizen or the elite listener of Say Yes to Life should call those companies, write letters, expose them on social media, and mobilize their neighbors. I mean, these are the kinds of things that could take just minutes, but it can send a signal to companies if they want to get woke, they will go broke. So it is hard. I understand for people who have mouths to feed that protesting within your company is hard. But I mean, there are definitely options like, well, you can contact 1792 Exchange and let them know what's going on in your company. So go to 1792exchange.com and you could, submit your testimonial there and we'll see what we can do to help you. But another thing that people can do is seek out values-aligned investment options. If companies see that people are walking on them for these reasons, it will get their attention. So there's asset managers and investment advisors out there like Inspire Investing and Guidestone that operate according to a biblically responsible investing model. And there's new exchange-traded funds that are being introduced, ETFs, that invest in companies whose behavior is more closely aligned with mainstream American values. In fact, the data found in 1792 Exchange's corporate bias rating database, which is kind of our flagship product, it's being used by an ETF that's seeking approval by the SEC as we speak. So, we do have power. We have the power to make our voices heard, because when companies hear from you, they hear from you and they act. Look at what happened to Cracker Barrel this year. Look what happened to Bud Light and Target and Tractor Supply last year. 1792 Exchange was very much involved in those campaigns to encourage those companies to do the right thing. So making our voices heard and making our money work where we want it to work are ways that an individual can participate in change.
Well, and that's what we did at CCV, just raising awareness to Nationwide and their participation in the Human Rights Campaign Equality Index. And we just, raised awareness to the farmers that they're supporting, like you mentioned, the local pride parades. They're supporting transgender surgeries and things of that nature. We put a little bit of public pressure, and they're no longer doing those things anymore. Talk to me a little bit about, for our listeners, again, what is the Corporate Equality Index that's put out by the Human Rights Campaign, and then the success that you guys have had along with us in making sure that these companies kind of return back to a neutral stance. Have you seen success across the country?
Yes, absolutely. And again, this is a team effort. I'm not going to give 1792 Exchange full credit for some of these things that have happened, but let's talk about the Corporate Equality Index. The Human Rights Campaign sends a survey every year to all the Fortune 1000 companies. And the Fortune 1000 companies, in order to get a 100 rating, which a lot of them want, well, fewer of them want that now, which is great news. But it started out as a little bit more of a benign survey. Pretty much, are you nice to gay people was the survey, and yes, you get 100. But now they've upped the ante so much that you have. The survey includes: do you market specifically using LGBT, transgender characters? Are you spending money marketing to these organizations? Are you covering transgender genital mutilation surgeries for children? So for a company to get 100, that company has to act extremely radically, way outside the American mainstream, and be part of promoting an agenda that we're all really fed up with, and it's come under more scrutiny now, especially since the Trump administration is making a lot of noise in this area, and essentially telling these companies to knock it off, or you're not going to have the advantages you once did. So, there's. I don't know the exact number. We've got 3,700 companies that we've rated in the corporate bias, in our corporate bias database, and a number of them have stopped participating in the Human Rights Campaign Corporate Equality Index. And once you have the data, once you communicate it well, and once companies know that the public is watching, they start to change their behavior. But that's not to say that we go and have cocktails on the beach. Rather, we have to keep storming the beach, because a lot of companies have made public noise about abandoning DEI policies. But the Wall Street Journal did a story last year that showed that even though you had a lot of companies saying, "Hey, we're dialing this stuff back," 486 out of the top 500 companies as of less than 1 year ago still had some statement or corporate commitment to DEI provided on their websites. So, are they really getting the message, or are they kind of hiding it and waiting out? Well, we're not going to give them that option. 1792 Exchange is going to continue to expose the bias of these corporations and really stand up for the American people and what our values are.
Gosh, well, thank you so much for your work, Greg. Tremendously appreciate it. I want to we got about 3 minutes left in the show. On the pro-life side of things, what do those of us who believe in the sanctity of human life, particularly, you have this background in kind of marketing and messaging, what do we need to be doing to build a culture of life which protects the preborn in our society and in law?
I hope this doesn't sound trite, Peter, but I'm gonna say it. We need to be strong witnesses. And when I was with you last week in Columbus, I was in the presence of nearly 100 such witnesses when I did that breakout session with the pregnancy centers. James 2:18 says, "But some will say, you have faith, and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I will show you my faith by my works." Meaning, if our faith is a serious faith, we're going to bear the fruit. And that fruit will be compassion and service for the vulnerable. And in the case of these pregnancy centers, because this is really fresh in my mind, and that's kind of the prism I'm thinking through right now, they're blessing women and girls in what could be the most terrifying time in their life with real help, real care, and manifest hope, which is somebody like my mother would have been.
Yeah.
But, as St. Peter wrote, we also need to be prepared to give an answer for the hope that is within us. And how that hope drives our labor is something we need to be conscious of, because the gospel is not only about that fruit; it's about the root, and the root is the words of life we speak verbally, the stories we tell, and the reason, capital R, that we do what we do. So people of faith who are doing the work in this area, who have been called to God, called by God to the ministry of protecting children at all stages from the very beginning of their lives, we need to be prepared to give that answer. And really have good messaging. We need to be messaging well and explain our work in what will sometimes be hostile circumstances. So always be prepared, always be hopeful, and be prepared to do the work necessary.
Greg, I'm so happy that your mother chose life. I'm happy that you're fighting for justice in the public square, and thankful that good men like you still exist. Thanks so much for coming on Say Yes to Life today. And again, one more time, give us that website.
1792exchange.com. It's that easy.
Awesome. 1792exchange.com. Folks, visit today. Become a part of the movement to bring justice, to bring truth to the public square. Greg, thanks again for coming on Say Yes to Life.
Thanks, Peter.